I knew the air was about to curdle the moment Chad smirked. That frat-brained peacock with a haircut that cost more than my first car strutted into the conference room like he'd just discovered electricity. Hair gel glistening like a mozzarella stick, left too long under a heat lamp, tie undone just enough to look disruptive. His daddy's shadow still fresh on the CEO chair, and yet here he was, clearing his throat like the second coming of Steve Jobs. Except instead of innovation, he brought a laminated HR memo and a smug little finger poised to ruin 18 years of my life. Effective immediately, Chad announced, with the cadence of a game show host, Karen will be transitioning into a more focused, strategic role, basement operations liaison. The room fell into that weird, stunned silence you only hear right after a car crash. Nobody breathed. Even the ficus plant by the printer leaned in like, yo, did he just say basement? Two board members blinked. One took out a pen, then hesitated like he didn't want the ink to witness this stupidity. I looked at Chad, then at the staff I'd fought for during budget cuts, acquisition talks, 3 separate data migrations, and one HR director who thought wellness meant mandatory yoga at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. My legacy, my people, my work. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't rage or cry or beg. I just said perfect, with a smile that could slice drywall. Now, before we go any deeper into this absolute circus of ambition, ego, and legal jiu-jitsu, I gotta ask you for a quick favor. If you're one of the 93% listening without subscribing, hit that subscribe button. Like the story too. It keeps this little storytelling crew caffeinated and dangerous. And trust me, this story's gonna make your office drama look like a church bake sale. Anyway, I stood up, smoothed the front of my jacket, and casually slid a slim blue folder from under my laptop into my purse. No one noticed, except maybe Alicia from compliance, whose eyebrows twitched a fraction like she sensed a ripple in the force. That folder held the kind of clause corporate attorneys forget they ever approved, buried under 6 feet of legal mulch, notarized and time-stamped 2 years ago, when I still believed the board had more brains than buttocks. Chad turned to the whiteboard, launched into a PowerPoint titled Karen's New Adventure, and I swear to God the first bullet point was embracing a more hands-on operational perspective. Translation: banished to the windowless floor beneath IT, where even the rats carried resignation letters. The rest of the meeting was a blur of half-hearted claps, awkward side eyes, people whispering, "Is this legal?" behind their reusable coffee mugs. HR handed me a 1-pager outlining my new expectations, as if I hadn't once rewritten the entire onboarding process, while half the exec team was on a silent retreat in Sedona. I walked out of that meeting with my purse a little heavier and my silence a little sharper. But let me be clear, that wasn't defeat. That wasn't surrender. That was checkmate in slow motion. See, Chad thought he'd pulled off a power move. But what he didn't know, and what no one in that room suspected, is that he'd just tripped the wire on something buried deep in the bones of this company. A clause that only 3 people knew existed. One of them retired. One of them was sipping wine in Tuscany. And the last, well, she was heading to the basement, with a key and a fuse, and a smile that meant business. 2 months before Chad's little basement banishment stunt, I was standing in the break room waiting for the Goddam Keurig to sputter out a half-decent cup of hazelnut despair, when I heard the unmistakable voice of entitlement coming from the hallway. Chad. He wasn't whispering. He never did. His volume knob was permanently set to frat house pledge ceremony. "She's a fossil," he said, like I wasn't holding this company together with duct tape and dignity. "Once she's gone, I'll own the cap table by Q4. Had he already signed off? All I gotta do is push her down a floor and the equity shift unlocks." There was a pause. Then laughter, some junior analyst whose balls hadn't dropped yet, and Chad cackling like he just discovered fire. My blood didn't boil, it froze. Because here's the thing about power grabs, they're loud. Real control, quiet as a paper cut. That's how I'd survived Darlex Systems for nearly 2 decades, through 3 CEOs, 5 rounds of layoffs, 1 absolutely disastrous attempt at corporate team-building goat yoga. I left my coffee to die in the tray and went straight to the vault, my Dropbox, the encrypted one even IT didn't know existed. Inside were years of buried bones, non-competes I'd written, MOU drafts I'd edited at midnight, notes from investor meetings no one else bothered to record. And there, glowing like a loaded mousetrap, was Section 12, C, Key Persons/Change of Control Clause. 2 years ago, during a minor liquidity panic, I'd helped restructure the Crosswell Ventures agreement. Back then, everyone was too busy panicking about payroll to read the fine print. But I read it. I wrote half of it. And with the help of our then legal counsel, a guy who'd been around long enough to remember when we faxed contracts, I tucked in a little safeguard, Clause 12C. In the event that any listed key person is materially reassigned, terminated, or otherwise stripped of executive authority without a supermajority board vote, operational control reverts to Crosswell Ventures for an interim period not less than 18 months. Guess who was one of the listed key people? That's right. Yours truly. It had taken 2 rounds of revisions, 3 passive-aggressive emails, 1 very expensive steak dinner to get that clause through the approval process without setting off alarms. But it was in, signed, sealed, buried. And now, after overhearing Chad's little Broadway soliloquy on how he'd own the cap table, I knew he was about to step on it barefoot. So I started digging. Quietly. Every document I'd ever touched, I reviewed again. Investor agreements, board bylaws, my own employment contract. I triple-checked who was copied on what emails, who initialed which footnote, which clauses were public and which were by request only. I pulled copies, timestamped them, saved backups on 2 encrypted flash drives and 1 physical copy in a safety deposit box under the name of my sister's Yorkie, Mr. Pudding. And just for good measure, I scheduled a catch-up coffee with Miranda Crosswell herself. She showed up 5 minutes early, no assistant, sipping a black Americano like it was a loaded weapon. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, sitting down. "How close are we?" "Closer than he thinks," I replied. She smiled. "Let me know when he signs something." I nodded. "You'll be my first call." Miranda's no fool. Crosswell Ventures didn't get to control $800 million in private equity by letting frat clown trust fund babies burn their portfolio companies to the ground. She knew what the clause meant. More importantly, she understood timing. Let Chad think he's playing chess. I'll just be over here setting the board on fire. Because once that HR form hits his desk and he scratches out a signature with that overpriced Montblanc pen of his, the countdown begins. And this time, I won't be the one moved to the basement. The morning I called Miranda, the sky outside my office window looked like the inside of an old copier, gray, humming, and about to jam. I sat with my hand hovering over the phone for a second longer than usual, not because I doubted the plan. I just knew that after this, there wouldn't be any way back to neutral ground. Once I brought Miranda Crosswell into play, the game stopped being corporate. It became personal and financial, the kind of combination that leaves blood on boardroom chairs. I dialed her direct line, one she gave me 3 years ago after we survived that late-stage funding disaster with a smile and a stiff chin. She picked up on the second ring. "Karen," she said, already knowing. "Do you have a few minutes to talk clauses?" I asked. "Only the fun kind," she replied, and I could hear the sound of ice hitting glass. She was either in a club-level office suite or her lakeside villa. With Miranda, both options were equally likely before noon. I laid it out clean. No theatrics, no overdramatizing. Just the facts. Chad was circling. The board was asleep at the wheel, and the HR team had already sent me a draft proposal for strategic restructuring that sounded like it was written by someone who thinks synergy is a personality trait. "I've reviewed my contract. The clause still stands." "Section 12, subsection C?" she asked, not missing a beat. "Exactly. Key person definition includes me. A board vote required for demotion or reassignment, which would qualify as a material change." "I remember," Miranda said. "I called it the in case of nepotism clause when we drafted it." "You might have been onto something," I said. "Because unless I'm hallucinating, your investment agreement still gives Crosswell Ventures operational control in the event of a change of control event involving a key executive." Miranda paused, then said, "Send me your most recent version. I want to see the headers. I already had it ready." PDF, notarized. Page numbers burned into the footer. I hit send. She opened it while I waited, scrolling. A few moments passed. Then she said, "This is the original signature set. Your timestamp matches mine." She let out a low whistle. "You've been patient." I wanted to make sure he was the one to make the move. "I'm not pushing. I'm waiting." She laughed. "You've always had better instincts than the rest of them. Could have been CEO 3 years ago." "I didn't want the job," I said. "I wanted the power to keep the company from being handed over to someone who'd treat it like his 4th failed startup." "Well," Miranda said, "looks like your insurance policy's about to mature." I felt something settle inside me. Not excitement, not even relief, just the click of inevitability. Moment when the crosshairs line up and you realize the bullet's been traveling for miles and is just now about to land. I won't activate anything unless he signs, I said. Of course not, Miranda replied. But once he does, call me. We'll make it surgical. I ended the call, sat back, and stared at the folder on my desk, printed copy, wet-signed, notarized, with a small yellow post-it that read, "For when the frat boy flies too close to the sun." That copy never left my side. I took it home every night, kept a duplicate in the glove box of my car, another in a fireproof safe behind a fake panel in my kitchen. You don't spend 18 years holding a company together with spit and strategy just to let some rich kid burn it down with buzzwords and an unchecked ego. Meanwhile, Chad was strutting around like a rooster in a henhouse, calling himself acting visionary and talking about launching a new NFT division, even though the man still used password 123 on his login credentials. I didn't stop him, didn't warn him, didn't tip my hand. Every time he forwarded another meeting invite without including me, I made a note. Every time he used the words "Karen will follow up," I logged the timestamp. Every deletion of my executive credentials from an internal database, I screen captured it. Because if there's one thing I've learned in corporate America, it's that silence is a weapon. And mine was loaded, notarized, and sitting in Miranda Crosswell's inbox. The day Chad officially exiled me to the underworld began with a passive-aggressive calendar update. 7:45 a.m., new location, B-level ops space. That's corporate for where we put the broken chairs and forgotten interns. No explanation. No meeting invite. Just a silent little middle finger tucked between my usual KPIs and a recurring Outlook reminder to order toner for the executive suite. 5 minutes later, my badge no longer opened the executive floor. By 8 o'clock, my inbox had gone eerily silent. No more board briefings. No vendor updates. No budget requests for approval. He cut me off. Systematically. Deliberately. The same way you ghost an ex after realizing they know your real credit score. At 8:15, a fresh-faced intern named Bailey, who still said heck like it was a cuss word, knocked on my office door. She had a clipboard, bless her, and a printed-out map of the building. "Hi, Miss Karen," she said nervously. "Mr. Chad asked me to escort you to your new workspace. He said you might get lost." Gave her a smile I've reserved exclusively for incompetent ex-boyfriends and IRS auditors. "I think I remember where the basement is," I said. "I helped design the damn floor plan." Bailey flushed tomato red, poor kid. She was just following orders. I waved her off and grabbed my bag, my laptop, and the blue folder I'd kept with me like a life raft in a sea of bullshit. One last glance at the office I'd spent 18 years building, not the furniture, not the fake ficus in the corner, but the systems, the trust, the people who used to pop their heads in to ask how I was doing because they knew I'd give a damn. Gone, for now. I took the stairs. Basement level 1 was a time capsule. Dead printers lined the walls like coffins for failed cost-saving initiatives. Old file cabinets with faded masking tape labels, Q1 2007 expense receipts, and defunct clients do not shred. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they were debating whether or not to die. My new office was a folding table near the janitorial sink. One chair, no outlets, no AC, and a lingering smell of lemon bleach and mildew, the scent of failure, apparently. I sat, opened my laptop, connected to the company Wi-Fi using my own damn hotspot because Chad had revoked my network priority. Then I got to work, not on revenge, not yet. Gathered final sign-offs from a few pending vendor deals, the kind that Chad's ego had left hanging because he didn't understand how logistics worked. I time-stamped every email, uploaded confirmations to my cloud archive, took screen recordings of the internal audit dashboard that still, for some reason, recognized me as interim COO. That wouldn't last long. At 11:02 a.m., I got the alert from IT. Subject, Executive Permissions Update Body. Karen Maxwell, reassigned to non-executive tier. Access Group, Operational Support Level 3, effective immediately. I stared at that email the way a sniper stares down a scope, because that was the trigger. Chad didn't know it, but he just fired the first real shot in a war he was wildly unprepared for. With that one administrative change, IT had unwittingly flipped the switch buried inside Section 12C. Per the clause, material reassignment or revocation of executive authority, that exact language, triggered the operational transfer of control to Crosswell Ventures. And it was documented. I forwarded the email to Miranda, no message, no context. Just the receipt. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Classy. Lethal. By noon, Chad was walking around like a dog who just marked a tree, bragging to HR about his leadership restructuring initiative and asking if we could get branded sweatshirts made for the executive team. That afternoon, I stayed quiet in my basement cave. I didn't retaliate. I didn't scream. I let the storm build over his head, slow and silent. My laptop pinged with every legal thread Miranda's team spun into motion. Every email I forwarded. Every server log I backed up. I ate my lunch cold, next to a broken fax machine, and smiled. Because sometimes you let the enemy build their little empire on quicksand, and then you wait for the first heel to sink. The next leadership stand-up was supposed to be a formality. Chad strutted into the room 15 minutes late, holding a protein shake the color of wet drywall and grinning like a man who thinks the applause is for him. Half the directors were already seated, checking their phones, lightly pretending not to notice the tension between me and the human can of Axe body spray now running the company. I was already there, seated at the far end of the conference table. No nameplate, no assistant, no laptop plugged into the presentation screen. Just me, my folder, and a phone face down next to my elbow. Chad clapped his hands once, like he was about to kick off a magic show. "All right, folks," he said, voice echoing off the glass walls. Moment, finalizing the new org chart today. Someone coughed. Someone else pretended to stir their coffee. Then came the moment he'd been building up to like it was his Oscar speech. "Karen," he said, not looking at me, "we're confirming your new title this morning. HR has the documentation ready. Just needs my signature. Obviously, this is purely procedural." He winked at one of the directors. I think it was Stuart from Strategic Growth. Stuart looked like he was rethinking all his life choices. An HR rep stepped in from the side with a clipboard and a thick envelope. Chad took it, skimmed it like a man reading a menu, and said, "Let's make it official." And he signed. First page, second page. One long, arrogant stroke of the pen. With each flourish, he drew closer to the financial detonation he didn't even know was wired into the very paper he was signing. I waited until the ink was dry and the HR rep nodded, collected the clipboard, and stepped back. Then I stood up, smiled, said, "Thank you, Chad." He blinked, surprised. "You're welcome," he replied, confused at the lack of venom. I turned to the directors, lifted my phone, set it gently on the table and hit speaker. The dial tone echoed through the room like a countdown. 3 rings, 4, then Crosswell Ventures, Miranda speaking. I didn't even glance at Chad. "Hi, Miranda. It's Karen." Her tone sharpened immediately. "Is it done? It's official. Control event triggered at 9:42 a.m. Eastern." There was a pause. Then Miranda said, cool and clean, "Understood. Stand by." I ended the call. The room didn't explode, but something in the air changed. Like the pressure dropped. Like everyone suddenly realized they were sitting inside a sealed room and someone just lit a match. "What the hell was that?" Chad asked, trying to laugh. But no one else did. Leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. "You just triggered a change of control clause in our investor agreement," I said softly. "Specifically, Section 12C. You remember that one, don't you?" Chad furrowed his brows. What clause?" The directors started flipping through their tablets. Stuart was already typing. "It's the clause that gives Crosswell Ventures operational control if any key executive is reassigned without a board vote," I said. "Which you just did, on record with witnesses and signatures." Someone dropped their coffee. No one picked it up. But the board didn't object. Chad stammered. Nobody said anything." "Silence isn't consent," I said. "It's compliance. And now," I pointed to the envelope on the table, "you just documented your own power transfer." Chad's face drained to the color of printer paper. His mouth opened, then closed again. Like a goldfish slowly realizing it's in boiling water. "I'm calling legal," he said finally, fumbling with his phone. "Good idea," I said, standing. "But I'd hurry. Crosswell's already drafting the transfer documents, and when the wire hits, I turn toward the door. It won't be your company to call." The sound of my heels on the marble floor was the only noise I heard as I walked out of that meeting. No one followed. No one called my name. Chad was still frozen at the head of the table, like someone had unplugged his personality. Imagine he thought he'd be crowned king by lunch. Instead, he just signed his own surrender slip, and now the walls were starting to shift. Back in the basement, which now felt less like exile and more like a bunker, I opened my laptop and fired off 3 emails. 2. Legal subject. Section 12C activation attached. Clause PDF time-stamped signature packet body. Per Section 12C, effective immediately. HR subject. Key person status change notification body. Per Section 12C, the material reassignment of executive authority has triggered a change of control event. Please update all records accordingly. 2. Board distribution subject. Executive reorganization protocol body. Please refer to the attached clause and Miranda Crosswell's statement forthcoming via Crosswell Ventures Legal. Implementation begins at COB today. Each one sent with the kind of silence that carries weight. The kind of silence that fills elevators after bad news. Then I picked up my phone again and called Miranda. No speakerphone this time, just a direct line. Karen, she answered, her voice crisp. My team is moving. Wire status confirmed, she said. It's been authorized. The full 100 mil. You'll get the receipt by 2:15. That includes the controlling equity. And yes, Chad's voting privileges end today. Cobb. I sat back in my plastic folding chair, the edge biting into my spine. There was a damp drip somewhere behind the storage lockers, but all I could hear was the quiet hum of transition, the gears of real power shifting. Also, Miranda added, since I suspect your boy Prince never actually read the whole clause, you might enjoy this. Section 12C wasn't just about investor protection. Oh, it includes a rider, subsection E, grants Crosswell Ventures control over executive appointments for an 18-month stabilization period. You included it. I remember. I blinked. I had included that. It was late in the red line process, tucked in after legal's third round of edits. No one even mentioned it back then because everyone was too worried about short-term funding. And now Miranda controlled the org chart, and I had just reminded her. I'll make sure the board sees that part, I said. Oh, they will, she replied. And one more thing, Karen. When this all settles, we're going to need a new interim CEO during the stabilization period. Someone who knows the guts of the company. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and looked down at the clause again. The fine print was glorious. Upstairs, I imagined Chad storming into legal like a man with a fire extinguisher in a burning casino, only to find his own initials at the bottom of the demotion forms. The signatures he thought were ornamental were, in fact, hand-delivered evidence of his incompetence. I could practically hear the frantic emails flying between his assistant and the in-house counsel. The panicked phone calls to board members who were suddenly unavailable. The dawning realization that his little power play had opened the gates of hell, and Miranda Crosswell had the deed. By 2:14 p.m., got the confirmation email. Wire transfer complete $100 million USD received. Attached was a formal notice from Crosswell Ventures Legal. Subject: immediate transfer of controlling interest per Section 12C of the investment agreement between Darlex Systems and Crosswell Ventures. Operational control, executive appointment authority, and voting rights are hereby transferred to Crosswell Ventures, effective immediately. It was done. Chad still had his fancy corner office, his custom leather chair, his espresso machine with the milk frother he never cleaned. But none of it mattered now. The title on his email signature was as empty as the desk I'd left upstairs. Control was no longer in his hands. It was in mine, through Miranda, through the clause, through 18 months of stabilization. And oh, how stable things were about to become. The emergency board meeting was called for 4:30 p.m. By 4:12, the main conference room on floor 16 was already humming with the electricity of impending fallout. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody poured the coffee. The air smelled like nerves and copy toner. Chad came in first, of course, charging through the glass doors like he still owned the narrative, as if the $100 million wire and the legal confirmation from Crosswell Ventures were just rumors, corporate gossip, something that could be spun into another visionary pivot on LinkedIn. I've reviewed the clause in question, he began, already red in the face, sleeves aggressively rolled, and it's outdated. It's an old agreement, 2 years old. It was written for a liquidity crisis that's been resolved. The clause was never meant to be active now. Stewart from Strategic Growth cleared his throat. You're arguing the clause was invalid, while still using it as a coffee coaster, Chad. Chad ignored him. Besides, he said, turning to the room, my father never signed off on it. I'd remember if something like this came across the executive desk. That's when the general counsel, who had remained almost monk-like through the chaos, slowly unzipped a manila folder and slid a copy of the agreement across the table. He didn't say a word, just tapped his finger on the margin of page 6. There it was. Initials, TD, Tobias Dunning. The CEO, Chad's father, his own slanted handwriting, next to the very clause Chad had tried to dismiss as relic paperwork. The silence was so loud it felt like static. Chad blinked. That could have been added after the general counsel raised a second sheet, time-stamped DocuSign verification, accompanied by a corresponding internal approval email chain. HR, legal, CFO, archived and double-backed on the company server. All of it dated, all of it real. Chad's mouth opened like he wanted to keep fighting, but no words came out. And then the conference speaker on the table chirped twice. Connecting call, Tobias Dunning. A pause. Then the CEO's voice, scratchy but unmistakable, filled the room. Is everyone there? Yes, sir, said the general counsel. I understand my son demoted Karen this morning. A longer pause. Yes, sir, I said. She's on this call? I am. Then let's keep this simple. Show me what he signed. GC held up the paper to the webcam mounted on the big screen. There was a long silence on the other end of the call. The kind that bends time. Then Tobias' voice, flat and quiet. He signed what? I didn't need to see his face. The horror in his voice was enough. The weight of legacy suddenly slipping from his grip, thanks to a son who thought leadership was something you inherited like a summer house. This clause was approved during the 2021 restructuring. GC said, you initialed the language personally. Tobias exhaled slowly. And my board never amended it. No, sir, so it's active. It is. Another silence, then quietly, Jesus Christ. I kept my eyes on the wall, hands folded in front of me, not triumphant, not smug, just still after weeks of pretending, of waiting, of strategizing in the shadows. I was finally standing in the light, and no one could shove me back into the dark. Tobias spoke again. Effective immediately, Chad is to step back from all executive decisions until this matter is fully resolved. Miranda will take over operational authority. Chad snapped, Dad, you can't just. I can, Tobias said, the gravel returning to his voice. And I am. You moved against a key executive without board approval. You triggered a clause you didn't understand. And now you've jeopardized our entire relationship with our primary investor. Chad tried to speak again but failed. Karen, Tobias said, his voice softening, you still have that clause? I do, I replied. I want you to forward it to me directly. No filters. It's already in your inbox. There was a pause, then a single word, good. The line disconnected. No one moved, I stood. Gathered my folder. Looked at Chad, no rage, no smirk, just that quiet, bone-deep satisfaction that comes from watching the scales finally tip back into balance. I walked out of the room like it was just another Thursday. The next morning, the lobby security guard looked like he'd just seen Beyoncé walk through the revolving doors. But it wasn't Beyoncé. It was Miranda Crosswell, and she wasn't here to pose for selfies. Black pantsuit, silk blouse, leather briefcase that probably had a kill switch. She didn't wait to be announced. She was the announcement. Her heels tapped a deliberate rhythm all the way to the 16th floor. The board had gathered behind closed doors, trying to bandage what was left of the Dunning legacy. She didn't knock. She just opened the door like it was hers, because technically it was now. Chad, already pacing like a man mid-divorce, froze when she entered. Gentlemen, Miranda said, and Karen. Miss Crosswell, stammered Stewart, trying to stand. We weren't expecting, you should have, she replied. She laid her briefcase on the table like a judge setting down a gavel, clicked it open, and pulled out a single folder. No laptop, no flashy deck, just paper, signed, stamped, surgical. This is the legal notice confirming operational authority has transferred to Crosswell Ventures, per Clause 12C, subsection E, effective as of the wire clearance yesterday at 2:14 p.m. She didn't wait for them to process it. And this, she said, holding up a second document, is the board notification declaring Chad Dunning's executive title null due to improper appointment and violation of investor protocol. She turned, stared directly at him. Effective immediately, you are no longer acting CEO. You're not to access any executive systems, authorize decisions, or communicate on behalf of Darlex Systems in any capacity. Chad's mouth opened, but Miranda wasn't finished. You've also submitted your recent internal emails for legal review, including the one where you wrote, quote, I'll delete the clause before legal even notices. They still use fax machines, end quote. Stewart winced. The general counsel pinched the bridge of his nose like he was calculating retirement options. Chad's voice cracked. You went through my email. Miranda raised an eyebrow. your company email, when you used to discuss unauthorized leadership changes and promise backdoor equity to your fantasy football group chat. She turned to the board. That thread's already with internal counsel. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Then Miranda looked at me. Karen, she said, voice calm, we need interim leadership while the review period is conducted. I'd like to appoint you as interim CEO with full executive authority under our stabilization agreement. Nobody objected. Nobody dared. I nodded once. No smile, no surprise, just gravity. I accept. Miranda gestured toward the head of the table, the chair Chad had been occupying like a borrowed throne. I walked slowly, sat down. The leather creaked beneath me, old and familiar, like it remembered me better than it remembered him. Chad didn't sit. He stood near the doorway, arms limp at his sides, face drained of color. A man unplugged, not fired, just removed, relevant in a room he thought he controlled. I opened the folder Miranda had placed in front of me. Top page, Interim Executive Authority Transfer Darlex Systems. Below that, a printed email thread, Chad's own name, Chad's own words, and a forwarded copy of the HR memo he'd signed like a toddler drawing on a contract in crayon. Behind me, someone whispered, well, that escalated. I didn't respond. I just picked up the pen beside the folder, signed the line, and leaned back into the chair he thought he'd earned. Meeting adjourned, I said. Chad didn't move. I didn't look at him. But I heard the elevator ding. And I knew he heard it too. The investor call was scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m. sharp, but the virtual conference room was already packed by 9:45. Legal, compliance, every board member worth their stock options, and a very pale Chad, now seated off to the side like a disgraced intern waiting for someone to remember he existed. I sat dead center in the frame, Miranda on one side of me, the general counsel on the other. Tobias Dunning, still recovering but back in form, had dialed in from his estate. The tension wasn't just thick, it had density. It could have stopped a bullet. The lead investor from their institutional wing appeared on screen first, followed by 3 other equity partners. Everyone looked alert. No small talk, no smiles. Miranda opened, cool and lethal. The wire is complete, she said. Ownership transferred. My team now holds the controlling interest in Darlex Systems. She paused just long enough to let that land like a meteor in a dinosaur park. The conditions of Section 12C were met when a key executive, Miss Karen Maxwell, was reassigned without board approval. All documented. All time-stamped, including the form signed by Mr. Chad Dunning at 9:42 a.m., 2 days ago. Tobias leaned into his camera like he was seeing his own legacy through a microscope. That signature cost us $100 million. Miranda nodded, and put us in compliance with the clause you personally initialed. Tobias didn't argue, he just looked at his son. Chad, to his credit, had the decency to look like he'd swallowed a stapler. Miranda turned to me. For the stabilization clause, I'm appointing Karen Maxwell as interim CEO. Unless, of course, she said, almost teasing, you'd prefer to sell. I didn't hesitate. No, I said, I'm staying. A quiet nod around the room, no applause, just approval, professional, cold, and absolute. I adjusted my camera slightly, leaned forward, and for the first time since this mess started, looked Chad straight in the eye. All I ever needed, I said, was one bad signature. Chad opened his mouth, but there was nothing left to say. No memo to backtrack, no spin to attempt. The man who wanted to erase me from the company had signed the paper that handed me the keys to it. I turned to the screen where Tobias's face lingered, the weight of everything visible in his lined expression. Then I stood up, straightened my blazer, and just before leaving the room, I turned over my shoulder and locked eyes with Chad one final time. Welcome to the basement. Chad, I said, you'll find it character building.